Okay, go ahead. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our second round of artist talks. I am Sophie Clordy, an artist liaison with the Lumen Prize. And I'm so excited to introduce our three artists for you today. These talks are presented in part alongside an exhibition created in partnership with Leonardo on NewArt.City. So feel free to check out the artist pavilions as they're speaking, and we'll have someone put that link in the chat as well. And the artists will have their own images, but definitely check out the pavilions at the same time. The Lumen Prize is a global competition that celebrates the best of art created with technology. We launched in 2012 and now offer about 9 awards in various categories for artists working internationally. And Leonardo is the International Society for the Art Sciences and Technology. It's a space of transdisciplinary research operating in partnership with Arizona State University in the US. And they're a really critical content provider through their publication. So we're really excited to be working with them, and I want to get these talks started so each of our artists have enough time. And please feel free, as each artist is talking, to put your questions in our live chat. After the end of each talk, I will go through the chat and take questions from the audience. And then at the end of all 3 artist talks, you'll have an additional chance to join the conversation and ask questions as well. So our first artist that I would like to introduce is Richard Vijgen. He is the winner of our 3D Interactive Award for his work, Persian Landscapes. And I'll let him take it away. Hi, Richard.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the introduction. I'm going to try and show my screen so I can show some slides. So let's see if that works. And if all goes well, you should see a picture. Can you see it, Sophie?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, great. Thanks. So this is a really important sort of image of the subject of most of my work. And I show this image to refer to the idea of the infosphere. And the infosphere is, in a way, a kind of reference to the atmosphere that sustains life for all animals, plants, and human beings. And the idea of the infosphere is that there is a kind of man-made system or environment that is an extension of our technological being that sustains our life as kind of informational beings. And I think it's a nice image that gives us a sense of awareness that we are all part of this sort of technological ecosystem in most of the things that we do nowadays. And I'm interested in sort of understanding this system, and I'm interested in exploring what keeps it together and how it relates to our everyday life and environment. And an important part of that is radio. So a lot of what underpins our sort of technological daily realities from working with computers and smartphones and all kinds of digital devices is their ability to communicate wirelessly with one another and with the world. And traditionally, radio, of course, is mostly thought of as a 20th century mass medium, as shown in this image, which is a picture of the Shukov radio tower in Moscow, that I think is an important icon of radio as a kind of spatial medium. This was built in a time when radio was also a kind of symbol of national pride and a kind of symbol of technological advancement. And today, we find ourselves in a situation where radio is no longer experienced so much as a spatial medium as I think in most of the 20th century, when in order to receive a television signal, you had to point the antenna on your roof towards the tower, or you had to sort of aim the antenna on your radio to get a good signal. Today, we are in a sort of environment where radio is much more sort of fine-grained in our environment, and this is sort of exemplified by these radio towers that are really not so recognizable anymore as radio towers, such as these trees or flagpoles, or these two guys over here. And I think it speaks to the idea that instead of icons of modernity or sort of emblems of national pride, radio has really found a place that is more hidden in the background and created an environment where we are kind of immersed in signals that is very difficult to pinpoint where it is that they're coming from. And this is a subject that I explored in a project that I did a couple of years ago, which is called Architecture of Radio, and which aims to visualize this kind of abstract, invisible system of radio cell towers, Wi-Fi routers, and satellites. And I'll show a brief clip. I'm not sure if there's audio to go with it, that shows how the app works. And what you see here is an application that is, in a way, a data visualization that shows the density of digital networks around you from the location where you're currently at. So you can point it up to see the satellites overhead. You can sort of rotate it around you to see cell towers and Wi-Fi routers. And if you use it in a big city, you see a super dense network, whereas if you use it out in the countryside, you might see a more sparsely populated landscape where there's a tower every now and then. And the way that this works as a data visualization is that it shows you a theoretical visualization of radio as a spatial medium. So what it does is that it sort of starts from your GPS coordinates and then renders a site-specific three-dimensional data visualization that you can navigate by moving the device around. But it's based on large data sets that describe millions and millions of cell tower locations, and it's based on calculations of satellite positions and also Wi-Fi network databases. So it's very much a theoretical reality. And after doing this project, I started to wonder if it was possible to, rather than show a theoretical reality, show a visualization that was based more on measurement, which is where the next project comes in, which is aimed at trying to paint a picture of the reality as it exists in radio around us, but based on measurement. So the center of this piece is a directional antenna that rotates around, and it kind of rotates in two axes, X and Y, in a sense that it describes a kind of half dome. And it's constantly measuring the signals, in this case, Wi-Fi signals. So it looks at the 2.4 gigahertz frequency. And after completing a full scan, it produces a half dome visualization that shows where all the signals come from. So this is a kind of first attempt to create a more, say, current or live visualization of signals around us. And while I was kind of interested in the image that it produced, I also thought that it was still a very technical image, that it's kind of isolated from its context. So it could also refer to other kinds of invisible phenomena like heat cameras or things like that. So I developed it a step further, where I tried to integrate the directional antenna with an output that was more sort of relating to the environment where it was positioned in, which led to this sort of second version of the work, where I combined the antenna with a plotter, a drawing machine that you could place in a certain environment. And while the scanner, the antenna, is trying to pick up all the signals, the plotter draws an image of the sort of radio dimension that is around it. It's kind of a experimental setup, I would say, kind of proof of concept to see if this would work. And I tried it in different environments to see the contrast between a very urban and more sort of remote landscapes. And again, what you see here is the pen plotter drawing clusters of signals coming from Wi-Fi routers. Now, the next and last step that I will discuss in this presentation is the work that is also shown in the virtual exhibition. It's called Vijgen Landscapes, and it again builds on these two previous projects in that it tries to explore radio as a dimension of reality, not so much in a spatial sense like this project does, but still in a sense that it tries to kind of visualize the liveness of radio. And this is a short sort of schematic that shows that what the visualization is about. You see the whole spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum, with radio, microwave, submillimeter, infrared, and visible light. And the visualization that I'm about to talk about deals with a small part of the radio spectrum from 0 to 1 gigahertz that contains a lot of interesting sort of designated parts that are used for lots of applications that I will show later. So this is an image of the work as it was installed at the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision in Hilversum. And it was produced as a kind of anniversary project for 100 years of radio in the Netherlands. So the first radio broadcast was held, actually the world's first radio broadcast, in the sense that it was like a public radio show that was announced and people could tune into it, was broadcast from The Hague in 1909. And the Institute asked me to develop a work that kind of commemorates this fact. And I thought it was interesting to show how radio has developed in this period of 100 years and focus on the application of the radio spectrum today. So again, this installation is recording, so it's measuring radio. It's using a digital receiver to scan the spectrum really quickly, and then produce a live or almost live visualization of the activity that is going on in the spectrum from 0 to 1 gigahertz. And then the installation tries to annotate all these signals that are being picked up based on a frequency database that differs from country to country, but it basically describes what kind of activity can be the spectrum can be used for in certain ranges. So for example, from 90 to 105 megahertz is for FM radio, but there are literally thousands of applications, from medical applications to military, spy satellites, mobile phones, all kinds of wireless systems. And this installation shows the sort of live activity throughout the spectrum and then annotates it with what it should possibly be. So for example, in this image, you see an annotation for walkie-talkies at 148 megahertz. Here's a short clip that shows how it works. And what I wanted to do with this project is to portray the spectrum as a landscape. So it's a sort of panoramic projection that you can move in front of, and then based on the position of the audience, you will sort of zoom in to a particular piece of the spectrum so you can kind of investigate what is going on in that particular part. So you can move from left to right, kind of like you would tune a classic radio that has a knob and a sort of indicator that moves from left to right. But in this case, you tune with your body, and then you can sort of widen and narrow by moving closer or further away from the screen. So it kind of opens up a window that shows a more detailed picture of what is going on in that part of the spectrum. So I think for me, this project, on the one hand, can be understood as a data visualization project, in the sense that it annotates information that is captured from the sort of ether, but it can also be experienced, I think, as a kind of panorama, in the sense of a kind of techno-romantic vista into this sort of invisible dimension of reality. So it's something that you can both get lost in a way, and can try to understand and rationalize. And I guess this is about 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, perfect. I want to hop into that. We can answer, because you did get a couple questions during your talk, but thank you so much. And I have a few questions of my own that
Sure.
I would answer too, but we have a question from Ben, who asks, what is the mapping between the radio signal's position and the pen?
So the relation between the signals and the pen plotter is that while the antenna is scanning, it's basically constantly rotating in two directions, and then as it picks up signals, it kind of knows where it's pointing at. So it knows from which direction the signal comes by trying to determine at which point it is strongest. So if you're in an open field, that means that when you point straight at the signal, because it's a directional antenna, it's the strongest at that sort of measurement location. So you get a sense of where it is, and then it sort of constructs a three-dimensional model, and then the plotter draws a kind of frame from that three-dimensional reconstruction, as it were, in a way that a painter would kind of cut a frame from reality. And of course, if you would put it inside and you have your router in the room, then of course the signal behaves very differently, because it bounces from wall to wall. So you get a really sort of echoey image where the same signal can come from all directions. But the general idea is that you try to pinpoint its point of origin.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. And everyone who didn't get their question answered or has more questions for Richard will come back at the end. So he will be talking again. But thank you so much.
Sure.
I'm gonna have Elyne go next. Let me pin her. And our second artist of today is Elyne Legarnisson, who is an artist based out of La Réunion, the small island. Is that correct? Yeah. I'm sure yes, you'll share more of your biography, but she won our XR award this year for her work Unbalanced, and I will let her take the floor.
Hello, hi. So yes, I'm Elyne. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me. So let me share my screen so you guys can see. Is that working? Hello? Sophie,
Yeah,
is that working?
Yeah, it's working. Sorry.
Cool.
Yes.
Thank you. So I am here to tell you about Unbalance. So I'm going to give you a bit of a sneak peek into my process, starting from the beginning to the final experience. I developed Unbalance during my master's at the Interactive Architecture Lab, so at the Bartlett. So I had the chance to have a full 8 months to explore ideas, prototype, experiment, without knowing too much where I would land. So it is this process that I'm gonna take you through now. So first, a little bit of a recap on Unbalance, so we know what we're talking about. So Unbalance is an interactive experience in XR, so in extended reality, which invites participants to play on the edge of stability. It rethinks immersive interactions by foregrounding the notion of embodiment. The work combines VR technology and 2 analog tools, a neoprene apparel and a tilting platform, to create multisensory stimuli. So I wanted to start by sharing a quote by Eccleston, which resonates with me both as a spatial and interaction designer, but also just as a human, I guess. So it says, bodily sensations greatly contribute to our minds being embodied and embedded in the world. It is how we experience our bodies and how our bodies experience the world. So knowing this, I guess I started to observe the world around me as well as my everyday life. And I felt like there was a little bit of a, well, or rather a strong contrast between our Western world, which is slowly welcoming the idea that body awareness and body movement are playing key roles in our physical and emotional health. But this doesn't quite translate yet in the way we design human space interactions. We increasingly evolve towards spatial context and interactions which tend to limit and control our moving bodies. Think of the movements you do to interact through a phone or a laptop, or the amount and variety of movements you do throughout your day at home or at work. Although this is quite the same right now, but so those same interactions also disperse our daily attention through constant visual stimuli. How many times during the day are you fully aware about any other sense than your visual one? Most interactive experiences in VR are no exceptions in that matter, as they primarily play off the visual sensory system, disengaging participants from their own bodies. So from those observations, I guess this triggered the questioning which guided and still guides my work. So those questions are, how could we imagine human space interactions foregrounding the notion of embodiment? And how could we imagine human space interactions training curiosity, exploration, and awareness rather than efficiency? Trying to answer those questions, I landed on somaesthetics theory and the idea of breaking movement patterns. So somaesthetics theory accentuates the aspect of the bodily experience in aesthetics and spatial engagement, and foregrounds the moving body as a malleable instrument through which we perceive the world. To make it a little bit more simple, the idea is that through moving in unusual ways, you can amplify your sensory perception, but also through amplifying your sensory perception, so that is of your body and of the world surrounding you, you are pushed to move in unusual ways. And all of this leads to learning body awareness. So basing myself on this theory, I found the direction, a more precise direction for my work, which was, could I create an experience pushing people to move in unusual ways through amplifying sensory perception? So I started to run a series of very initial experiments to grasp this idea a bit better. I wanted to explore the relationship between movements and perception of the body, both physical and virtual, as well as the perception of the world. One of my very first experiments was very simple. I created a series of weights that I placed on different parts of my body, and I started to move just to see how this would modify my posture, shift the perception of my own body, and change the way I moved. So if you are a man, or if you are an A cup, you would be amazed how wearing a D cup can actually completely change the way you move and perceive your body. So then I moved on to virtual avatar, so using inverse kinematics. I played with a virtual avatar that would extend my limbs or delete half of my body, seeing how shifting the visual perception of my body could change the way I moved. Then I looked into shifting the perception of the world around me, and more specifically of its verticality. So I created this VR world where you were placed within a field of vertical lines, which would slowly rotate while you were surrounded by a fog, so you couldn't see your feet. The whole idea being to see if you could lose the sense of verticality, and then how you would move then. So this all landed me to the use of XR, sort of like mixing those physical and virtual elements to combine to create a new reality. I started to put people in harnesses, putting them upside down, and observe the play between proprioception and visual perception. This last one was clearly a little bit too extreme, but it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot through it. So this is how I landed on the idea of balance as the node for my work. So through those experiments, I saw how the perception of the stability and verticality of the physical and virtual world was interacting with the perception of the body, the sense of balance, the sensations of weight shifting as you balance and as you move. I realized that moving is really nothing else than continuously negotiating balance between the body and the world. When you do so, your spine really plays a key role, as it links the heaviest parts of your body, which are your hips and your head. So this is how the notion of balance became the node of the experience I was creating. I found it would be key to shift the perception of the body and world, make people move in truly unusual ways by engaging their core, and finally make them more aware of their body in the world. So moving on to prototyping. The first prototype I created looked at how to shift the perception of the world in XR. So the first element of this experience is a tilting platform, which aim is to push the participant's sense of balance to their limits. So it pivots around its center, and it's cushioned by foam blocks. And so it feels very floaty when you walk onto it. There's a motion tracker on the platform, which is tracking its movements and rotations. So when the participant explores the world, the platform tilts, and then the horizon of the virtual world and rain-like particles in the sky respond to the rotations of the platform. So it really plays with your perception of verticality. When I observed participants exploring this world, I realized that their attention was really directed outwards. They were doing slow to super fast movements, engaging mainly the bottom half of their body, so the one that was in contact with the platform. So from there, I thought, okay, so if I want to really make people move in unusual ways, then it means I need to engage the upper part of their body, the one that is key with their balance, so essentially get their spine to move. So in this aim, I developed a series of wearables, which allows an additional weight to be displaced on the body while moving. I filled tubes with very heavy beads, so lead beads, what you use to go diving. The tubes use different materials, they're soft and hard, and so it gives the wearables a more or less linear response by having more or less friction with the beads. I explored different locations on the body. So I worked with the dancer Tia Hoki, who you can see on the pictures, and I analyzed how different parameters would influence movement exploration, encouraging different qualities of movement. So in the form, curves or lines, but also in the speed and force. So if it was slow or impulsive movements, projective, creating poses, and so on. The haptic sensation of the beads vibration, as well as their sound feedback through those experiments, really became an integral part of the design, adding a layer of information guiding the participant in their movements. So this all worked really great with Tia, who's a professional mover. But when I tested it on just normal participants, whom you can see on the second line on this slide, I realized that the same experience was not fully involving the widest audience, and just because they would remain very shy and have like a bit of a stage fright effect. So this is how we moved to prototype 3, which looked at how to combine VR with the apparel and the platform. In the aim of allowing a wider audience to get fully immersed in the experience. So essentially to get people to forget about the world around them, to be fully involved and allow them to explore movement. So in this experience, the participant stands on the tilting platform, he wears an apparel, but also has a motion tracker around the hips. So this allows the body to emit particles in response to the participant's movement and rotations of the platform. The virtual particles visually support the behavior of the physical beads shifting within the apparel. And so as you hear the beads shifting, you can see it in the virtual world as well. So I brought this experience to Ars Electronica as a prototype, which allowed for a large public to play and explore, from children to adults, people who never experienced VR to professionals. And so this was really great for me to understand, to get a bit of, get a very wide sample and understand how people would behave in this experience. They started moving from head to toe, slow to fast. Some started jumping, some almost destroyed my computer, but they were really exploring the limits of their own bodies. So I was like, okay, so I'm onto something here. And I could see as well from chatting with people that the experience was bringing their attention, was really bringing their attention inwards towards their body movements, their sensation, haptic sensations, but also the world around them. The only one of the things that though had to be fixed was that the world was a little bit too overwhelming. So still the visual was really overtaking on other bodily sensations, which obviously was going against my aim. So I realized that there was it was really key find the right balance between different stimuli. It is this last prototype that I decided to develop as my final design. So the main challenges, as I just stated, was so the main challenges to solve was how to balance visually, auditory, and haptic stimuli. as well as how to create a virtual avatar which will enable the participant to be truly embodied in the virtual world, rather than a bunch of flowing balls. So first I looked at developing the platform. So its aim, as I stated before, is to push the participant sense of balance to its limits. So I designed its finishes to really encourage a maximum of movements. The top of it is just yoga mat material, which is super soft and feels safe under the feet and the hands, so that anyone would feel free to move and fall without being scared to get hurt, which is definitely key to exploration. The design also visually enhances the movements of the platform for the visitors around. And the tubes, so there's also tubes filled with LED beads hidden under the top, which are integrated in cohesion with the apparel. So the beads are displayed as the platform tilts, which adds a layer of auditory stimulation in response to the participants' movement. Then we have the apparel, which final design is a bodysuit, which I designed in collaboration with Farid Akmal. It augments sensations of shifting weight and contributes haptic and auditory stimulation. So as we said before, it does so by displaying LED beads within thin silicone tubes. So we used a neoprene material, which allows a very close sensation of the beads vibrations, while still having enough structure to support their weight. And we also use different tube materials, so some silicone ones, some perspex ones, so they would have different types of frictions with the beads, and allow for a variation of responses across the body. So this is it for the apparel. And then finally we have the VR layer. So the VR layer aims at shifting both the perception of the body and the world, using the fluidity between both as a mean for movement exploration. So there is, the participant is wearing a VR headset and a set of motion trackers on the hands, on the feet, and on the hips, which allows for a virtual avatar and virtual world to change in substance and gravity attraction in response to their movement. The avatar and world respond to the direction, to the speed, and the intensity of the movements. The input focuses on the hip-head axis and the platform top, which are like the key sort of the two axes that the participant has to negotiate to keep their body in balance. So as I said, the participant is embodied in the virtual world using inverse kinematics. So that means that he or she wears a motion tracker on each hand and feet, as well as on the back on the hips. And inverse kinematics allow to generate a virtual avatar to the proportions of the participant, which moves in real time. The behavior of the body and world particles is designed to visually augment the sensations provided by the beads on both the apparel and the platform. So we worked, we really worked that behavior so that they would work as a duo and not against each other. And then, so yeah, finally, so this whole experience lasts for 10 minutes, which I found was long enough for people to sort of forget about the world around them and get really immersed, while also allowing for a progression in the experience. So at at the very beginning of the experience, only the avatar appears, and then slowly the world starts to respond, and then it goes back to the body. So the idea is that the attention of the participants sort of shifts from the body to the world and back to the body again. And then, so looking at the visual style of the VR experience. So the idea, as I said before, was to really make sure that it wouldn't overtake on other stimuli, so on auditory and haptics. So I designed it in hues of muted grays to make it as soft on the eye as possible, while still allowing for the eye to grasp the motions. So yes, so it is the interplay of multisensory stimuli enhanced by nonlinear responses, which awakens the player's curiosity. So he is made unusually aware of his moving body and environment, and provoked to engage in an exploratory process through movement.
Great, I just want to hop in. Thank you so much. I think that we're going to save all these. We have some really good questions for you. And I have questions myself, and they just keep coming. I think we're going to do for them. We have.
Ooh, I can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna save some of these questions for the end, just to make sure that we have enough time for Mio. But thank you so much, and we will circle back in a second. Great. So our final artist today is Mio, Christian Loclair. Let's see if I can find. And I can pin him.
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
Oh, hi Mia.
Hi, how are you doing, Sophie?
Good, how are you? Great, so I will let Mio take it away, but just as way of introduction, Mio won our BCS Artificial Intelligence Award for his work Elyne, and we can take it from there.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Can you hear me? Is that
yes.
Perfect? Then let me try to share my screen and then double check if you still hear me. Is that okay? Can you see that?
Yep, you're good.
Perfect. I would like to speak about Elyne and actually the idea behind it and why I do believe it is necessary to discuss this, at least from my humble perspective. It leads me back to this sensation now from a computational perspective and a formalistic perspective. Both visual sensations that we see in that image are quite similar. We would call that simplex or parallel noise that is used in order to distort a view. And on the left side, however, we see nature being created through minerals. It feels random, yet there's an underlying mechanism that has created those sensations. And on the right side, we see a human artist, Vijgen, basically illustrating his inner demons. Yet it is very difficult if you're a computational artist to articulate the difference, to pin down what's so different about that. And that is also for this example. On the left hand side, we see nature again in action, just demonstrating a piece, which we wouldn't consider a piece, just a natural sensation. And on the right side, we see, I think it's Alicia Quade doing her beautiful artworks. Now, the main difference is actually that we project intention within. Now, as naturists, we feel that is probably much more biology and physics, and ends up for us in our perception quite randomly. We do believe that there is an intention within the artist that leads to actually building the stone, and that is very important to us. That is why we rather prefer putting her stone into the museum than the randomly created one. Now, the question that always drove me was, the idea is, what if a machine would create a very similar stone, a very similar art piece? Like, what if a machine could express something, and how would we judge then the corresponding artifact? Now, would that mean basically that nature and the machine, which is basically just an assembly of randomly collected natural objects, natural material within nature, basically the same, and of course they lead, one leads to the other. That basically would mean that that intention of the artist that we enjoy so much when we go through museums and galleries is also just a natural consequence, not necessarily the idea. But I would like to come to that later. I think about this, and mostly about this since quite a while. I came from dancing, and I remember that I knew that I was dancing. And it normally went like this. I felt something, and then I moved in space, and then this feeling basically materialized in space. Now, being totally in love and with what I do, I thought, let me double check if it is real, because I don't know if it is real. Maybe I could just build a algorithm that can do simply the same. So I started investigating, for instance, a dance style called tutting, which is basically mathematically reduced to 90 degrees, and found out that actually I was pretty much inspired by random decisions of a little virtual robot I have built, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, that can do the same. And all of a sudden I was dancing a lot every day, and I got tired and got less and less creative the more I danced. So I have built myself a little machine that inspired me whenever I got tired of new inspirations for being creative. So I danced for 3 times 2 hours every day and went home, and still felt the need that I need to get better and be somehow creative. So, but I didn't know how to do so. So I built a robot that continuously inspired me. I basically outsourced the idea of the cognitive ability to create new forms. And then later had the chance to create theater pieces and my own choreographies for different spaces. And then as soon as I knew kind of how I would do about that, I built a machine again that helps me in doing that. It optimizes that basically replaces myself. So I did this project called Pathfinder in order to investigate if it is possible for a machine to continuously choreograph humans and inspire them as they move. And I do believe that I have spent as a dancer so much time in rooms with mirrors that I've felt like I should also outsource the way everyone should think about themselves while looking in the mirror. So I have built a machine that looks into the mirror and thinks about itself. So I danced, and then I built a machine that can dance. I choreographed, and then I built a machine that can choreograph. I thought a lot about myself in front of mirrors, and then I made a robot that stands in front of the mirror and thinks about itself. And I made a lot of designs across the last 15 years, especially at my studio called Waltz Binär here in Berlin. And then investigated if a machine could ever come up with a 3-dimensional design in space. And now we did this. Now looking back, I have no real clue why I always did this and why I always coded whatever I was able to do. But I know for sure that for me, it wasn't to prove that the machine can do what I do, but to prove in retrospective if I ever really did. And that is a very different perspective for me, at least, towards it. I'm not necessarily interested if there is an artist within the machine, but I'm super interested if there is a machine within the artist that is beyond calculation and has a true intention that can stand against mathematics. And that is what the project Helen is all about. And now that was more or less summing up. I would like to describe more in detail how this really went. We basically used a 3D gun in order to our own custom 3D gun in order to create a high resolution network that is able to generate new artistic, historic realities, alternative realities, that is trained on true realities from our historic past. That is the technical sensation, but not necessarily what we would like to share. The poetic sensation is what happened afterwards. When I basically found that object, we have printed that into marble, and we received it here at the studio. And one of my colleagues came over and he looked at it and he said like, oh, look, there's the nose. And I was like, how can you be so wrong? Don't you see who that is? Because for me, it always was a very a precise person. I was very happy about actually having a precise picture of who I wanted to portray, but no one ever recognized who I think this shape represents and what this network now tries to reflect, being trained on our historic data. In my opinion, it's a clear historical figure, but not many people think so. And I always felt offended by that because I felt as an artist, I failed. I kind of failed trying to articulate what I wanted to do. And just after it, I started to realize that I'm not the authority in space because I actually have no valid proof of where the face is and where the nose is. There's no one I could ever ask. There's not me. There's not one of my colleagues here at the studio, and maybe the observer, but definitely no authority that would prove everyone else wrong. And I just like that sensation that it somehow feels like a black hole of intention. It stands right now here at the studio. It's always cold, like the way marble is. And I feel like I couldn't point at the person that made the correct design decisions, the artistic decisions, but who made that. And that gives it to me an interesting emptiness that I would like to follow to discuss. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we have a lot of questions for all the artists. And I'll start with you just because you just finished our talk, but Gustavo Rincon, who's one of the producers of the virtual exhibition, asked a great question, which I think you would love to answer, which is, could you discuss randomness and failure in your work as a whole and just in general? Sorry, could you hear me?
Is that question directed towards me?
It's directed, yes, first towards you, and then I will open the floor to the other artists as well.
For me to discuss randomness, in computer science as well as philosophy, randomness is a topic as much as destiny. It's quite hard to discuss that. From a mathematical perspective, I do believe that randomness is a projection that we always perceive when we can't understand. So like there's a flash coming by, I don't understand weather, so that must be quite random. I'm not sure if that's random or a natural consequence of multiple parameters that I didn't see coming. But just because I didn't see them coming doesn't mean they're totally random. So random in general, for instance, is a very human word. We feel, for instance, and I used it earlier because we see nature evolving and we feel like, oh, look at that stone, completely random. But it's not necessarily random, it's just random to my understanding. And that's the same how we treat this in classical computer science. So if you want to generate a random number in computer science, you basically divide milliseconds by hours, by calendar date, and you get a weird number coming out. And no one saw that coming because we are not able to do that so fast. So we get quick data. Now the question is that number truly random, as no machine is really able to create true random? No, it's not at all. But for us, it looks completely out of the blue. And that is why randomness is mostly, at least in mathematics, a magical trick that is used in order to make sure that the observer is not able to track down its source. Not necessarily is it random.
Thank you. And if Elyne or Richard want to take on the question of randomness, I invite you to do that as well. Both of you can take questions now.
Sure. Do you have a specific question, or do you want me to elaborate on the previous discussion?
If you would like to elaborate, there are other questions directed towards you that I can ask, but if you're interested in talking about the act of randomness and
yeah, I think it's something that comes up with. I've been working with neural networks lately for new projects, and I think a similar question went through my mind about what it is that comes out of these models, and how to understand the sort of unpredictability of the results. And I keep circling back, I think, to something similar that Mia said, is that generally it revolves around patterns that are beyond the scope of our capability to comprehend and predict. And so it's, for me, I understand it also as a matter of skill, is that the sort of the skill of the pattern and the skill of the amount of information leaves us to accept things like the machine can produce art, or the machine can produce randomness, or the machine can produce something unexpected, where I understand it to be just my limitation to sort of work with the skill of the patterns at hand.
And Elyne, if you want to weigh into it, actually, there was a specific question directed to Elyne, and because we had to move to Mia, I want to ask it now because I think it is a great question. And it's also from Gustavo, who asks, is the objective to discover the flaws in your system, or a sublime discovery of the performer yourself within the system? Kind of a question.
I was reading this question in full, which says, please discuss the research methodology in your design process. What is the overall vision? How does your research either critique or support the current theory in the field? I think, well, from the way I presented my work, I guess you could see an analogy with scientific research, but that's really not, that's more just me as a designer and an artist having a little bit of a systematic mind, but it's really just an exploration of how human space interactions could get people to move and explore movement. So this is just me trying different things and observing different things, but without thinking that I'm gonna discover the great truth about anything. So yeah, that's what I had to say about this.
That's a great answer, and I think kind of goes along with the question I had, which I think will kind of cover some of the questions that were also asked. But I think that all three of you, and I think it's strange to loop you all together because the works you produce are so radically different. But I think that each of them kind of in some way look to understand locality and our own, understanding our own localities. And so I was just wondering if any of you wanted to answer how you understand there's the intention of the artist, intention of the body, understanding how we relate to even the invisible like fields around us. So if you want to talk about what you see your art doing within the broader field of art and tech.
I'm really sorry, you're really breaking up.
Oh, no.
So I'm really struggling to understand what you're telling me. So yes, I believe your question was maybe targeted to the three of us. I'm not sure.
Yes,
because I don't think I can answer.
I can repeat, or I'll put it in the chat. So
I'm sorry.
I don't know if either of you could.
There's pros and cons about escaping to tropical island. The internet is definitely a con.
I'm getting a question from Gustavo that maybe I can answer in the meantime.
Go ahead, yes, and I will type mine out.
So Gustavo, you're asking me, you're recreating what exists within the signal information. Are you formalizing a new informational aesthetic? The fields that are created are compelling aesthetically and new type of spatial language. And I think you also asked earlier about the radio waves and how to read that, or how to sort of position that within a sort of broader field. I think with the work, what I wanted to get at is that as it was designed to celebrate 100 years of people using the radio spectrum for their benefit, I was thinking about the fact that 100 years ago, this spectrum was also already there, but it was empty in a way, or it was not empty. I mean, it was sort of filled with natural sort of electromagnetic waves and fluctuations. And since that time, we kind of filled up this space to use it for our benefit. And I think what I wanted to do with the work is to look at this dimension of reality, not just as a kind of utilitarian space or something that we can understand as a utility, but something that we can understand as a landscape, as a sort of, like I said earlier, a dimension of reality that you can appreciate as a natural phenomenon. And by doing that, I'm hoping that it can somehow sort of bridge the divide that we often think there is between people or nature and technology, that technology is a kind of separate field or separate reality, whereas I think that it's interesting to try and look for languages that kind of bridge that divide and try to understand radio not so much as a tool, but as a dimension of nature, and understanding it as being more connected to ourselves and our bodies and our reality, rather than separated or distanced. I hope that answers your question.
That was a good answer. And tell me if I'm breaking up again. I did type out my own question in the field as well.
Cool, thank you. So yes, I do definitely see art as a way to explore, I guess, to explore the way we relate to technology. So, in the sense that, well, definitely our world, like, we're going to have more and more of an overlaying of a physical world and a digital world, and so our world is definitely changing slowly, well, or rather rapidly now. But through art, we can sort of fast-pace this a little bit, and imagine ourselves in this world later. And so I guess I'm almost talking about speculative design here, but I guess it is really a way to ask questions whether it is the direction tech is going, and whether the direction tech is going towards is the one we want. So if we are in the example of my work, just looking at if we have more and more technology and interactions around us, do we want them to make us more and more static, really? Or is that just going to make us less and less human instead of more and more human? So yeah, I do think art has a role to play in asking those very questions.
I would like to answer, but I'm not.
Have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I would like to answer, but I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly. If we believe that intellectual relationships play a role in art and technology?
No, more, I think whether or not you see that kind of investigation in like a intentioned investigation into spatial versus intellectual relationships as kind of a necessary role in the field of art and tech, or just in digital art.
I just see I have to excuse for my sweater, but I'm already in Christmas mood. Yeah, spatial relationships. I wouldn't say that that is needed. I do believe, however, that there's a challenge with technology in general. It is distracting and it can be demanding and it can be challenging for the observer. And it would be necessary to avoid that if art and technology should have a sustainable future discussing contemporary challenges. I do believe there is no better material right now about to discuss contemporary challenges than by the use of contemporary material. So a lot of people use paint and a lot of people use stone. And I prefer technology, but not necessarily because it connects or hides very efficiently, but because I'm very often astonished. That's the only reason. I'm very often astonished when using technology by myself and about the things that are possible and the philosophical consequences of what we are able to do by the use of technology. The things that we discuss, however, don't necessarily change. And the responsibilities that we have within the field of art and technology does not at all differ from the responsibilities all other artists have too. They have to discuss and connect to the environment and inspire and question. And I just prefer the material. But when it comes to certain expressions, I don't feel more responsible. I actually believe that it's very well picked, as Richard and Elyne have very different topics, yet they all try to speak to humans. And that is the audience I would suggest. And the topic can differ all over the world, in my opinion.
Great, thank you. And I don't want to keep you three longer than we were supposed to, but I really appreciate your time. And Richard, if you want to chime in as well, I know on the last question, you're welcome to before we shut it down.
Sure. I think Gustavo mentioned in the chat the idea of technology as a medium and material is a great way of thinking. And I agree. I think there is a sense of urgency for me about using technology because I think it is an important driver of change right now. And I think if I understood Mio correctly, that by using technology, it's not so much that you're asking different questions because you're probably asking age-old questions about what it is to be human, what it is to express yourself, how you relate to others, how you relate to power, how power relates to you. But I think by using technology to explore that, you have a tool that makes it very current and very urgent. And I think for me, the main problem is when technology is portrayed as a service or as a sort of neutral utility. And I think it's an extension of being human, and by treating it as such and being experimental with it, playing with it, making art with it, you can explore urgent questions, I think, in a way that I think many people that use technology understand. So it's a way to explore being human.
Thank you so much to all of you for all your words and your time. Please, everyone, check out the exhibition, and all of these artists have pavilions where you can dive also into the theory. A lot of articles written by Leonardo really kind of add a lot of dimension. So thank you so much. I hope we get to continue this further in the future. I'm sure we will. All right, bye everybody.